If you look at Chapter 11, measuring macroeconomic activity, which is something a manager must keep an eye on, in particular GDP, it's a great chapter. You should absolutely read it. But how does the government calculate gross domestic product, which is very important in terms of your pricing strategies, in terms of gauging your growth versus the economic growth? You want to know that as a manager. If you see the economy growing at a certain level, you should know what your growth is relative to economic growth and how to calibrate your earnings and how to calibrate your pricing relative to earnings. If you see the economy picking up, you might have some pricing power. If it's slowing down, you might want to cut expenses. But absolutely, every manager needs to follow GDP and its relationship to its core, to its company. But at any rate, how does the government calculate it? Well, in the bowels of the Bureau of Economic Statistics, the number GDP comes out. And how it basically does it in a number of ways. But the most easy for you to understand is, first it looks at everybody's W-2, so to speak, or everybody's paycheck. And they know that you have a gross number and you pay taxes, and after you pay your taxes, there's disposable income. And disposable income is what you have left after you pay taxes. So that number shows up on the personal consumption. They already know what you're paying in taxes. That's what they get. So they can account for that. But whatever's left and isn't saved in a bank is what you're spending. And that's disposable income. That's why they watch the savings amount and the savings percentage, marginal propensity to save in economic terms. They watch how much every citizen at different income levels, what their propensity to save is. So supposedly somebody making 50 or 60,000 may not save as much money as somebody say making 100 or 200,000, and but they don't need to guess on that. In the end, they know what resides in the banks. So once they know what you spend, they also know where you spend it. And that is how they measure personal consumption expenditures, which, by the way, is the single largest component of GDP in this country. We're a nation of consumers. So 71% of our income goes toward consumption. Then we look at private domestic investment, and that's the investments by corporations. So they know that whatever didn't get paid out by corporations to investors or to employees remains back at their ranch or at the company, so to speak, and that's money that they're spending on capital goods like factories and trucks and computers and everything that makes the engine of the U.S. economy move. Now keep in mind, we deduct depreciation from that because anything we're replacing, which is represented by depreciation, is not growth in the economy. Only new spending gets counted. So gross private domestic investment or corporate spending is the next number, and it makes up about 13% of GDP as of 2011, and that's per the book. Finally, they know what they collected the government in taxes, and that's government expenditures. So the U.S. Government budget has been running about $3 trillion. 1.2 trillion is federal money that goes through transfer payments, Social Security, that sort of thing. We spend almost $800 billion on defense and $400 billion on non-defense. So that's where the numbers come from government spending. And then finally, we net out our exports. Whatever we export is positive for our economy because we're basically making things and other countries are paying for it. Whatever we import, we subtract because we're basically paying for things overseas. That's why there was such a concern in the 80s and 90s when we were buying many foreign goods, especially things imported from China, and the Chinese were buying our treasuries with their with U.S. dollars, because basically that's a huge negative for manufacturing and it's a huge negative for the GDP. Now, it's gotten better somewhat over the years, and certainly we're starting to export oil, and that helps a lot. We're not importing as much oil. So those things are all big positives with fracking and those sort of things. But one of the concerns is, you want to have the law of comparative advantages. That's an economic principle, the law of comparative advantages, which means that we should produce the things we're good at and let other countries produce the things that they're good at, and we trade, and the global economy is more efficient. But that doesn't necessarily help people in places like Detroit or in the manufacturing sector, where they have lost jobs to competitor or steel, where they have lost jobs overseas. So while we do want efficient economic growth on a global basis, and we want definitely political and geoeconomic a system that allows us to get along with our neighbors and help influence capitalism and human rights, and that's getting more into the political spectrum, it definitely, there's also the argument of keeping jobs at home and not importing as much of foreign goods. So those are the four things that make up the GDP, the largest being the $10 trillion that goes to personal spending, $2 trillion that corporations spend, and the $3 trillion federal budget, $800 billion of that which goes to our military, which is a huge part of what protects our country and our currency, and the rest is the net of exports and imports. So that's a good look. You should be reading these chapters, but definitely explains how GDP is calculated.